The day I agreed to play dead, it wasn't about revenge. It was about finally hearing what they said when they thought I couldn't listen. October in Cooperstown has a strange kind of beauty. The air smells like burning leaves and cold mornings. The maples along Glen Avenue flare up like the last embers of a fire, and my house, the one I built beam by beam after Margaret died, seems to breathe slower when autumn comes. It was 62 degrees the afternoon. My sister first ran her hand along the banister like she already owned it. I didn't notice the way she looked at it back then. Not really. I only remember the soft drag of her palm over the wood, like someone measuring something that isn't yet theirs. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Ellie had been coming around more often that year. She'd just finalized her divorce, and every time she pulled up in that dented silver Lexus, she'd step out wearing perfume that reminded me of cheap champagne and long conversations she never intended to finish. She'd smile at me like a nurse talking to an elderly patient, too sweet, too patient, like she already knew how the story ended. Jacob, my son, was worse in a quieter way. 34, still convinced that the world owed him something for the years I worked late to make sure he never had to. He'd bring over six-packs and talk about the future, as if I were a piece of furniture he'd already set aside in the will. The house itself, 3 floors, wide porch, library on the west side, was the last living piece of my wife. She died in 2009. That library is where she used to read The New Yorker out loud, laughing at pieces she didn't actually find funny. I rebuilt that room after the funeral. Every brick and nail was a conversation with someone who wasn't coming back. It was a Thursday, October 11th, 2018. A property tax bill, $7,842.62, sat on the kitchen counter under a chipped blue bowl. I remember the exact amount because I underlined it twice in my ledger. I've always been meticulous. The house is paid off, the trust's clean, and every receipt has its place. I stepped out to help Martha Lee, my neighbor, fix a loose gutter on her porch. When I came back, the bowl was still there. The bill wasn't. At first, I thought I'd misplaced it. That night, I tore the kitchen apart, drawers, cabinet tops, the folder by the fridge. Nothing. The next morning, I called the county treasurer's office. The woman on the phone said cheerfully, "Oh, Mr. Harper, we already sent the change of address confirmation." "Change of what?" I asked. "Address. The new address on file. We sent it to 2110 Ridgefield. That was Ellie Sips's address." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence stretch. The kind of silence where the truth starts to breathe on its own. 2 weeks later, my accountant Tom Avery called me from Albany. He said, "Quinn, buddy, you set are making it hard to help you. Next time you change an address, just give me a heads up, okay?" I was sitting on the porch steps with my old brass house key spinning between my fingers. I said very quietly, "I didn't set change anything." He paused. I could hear him shuffling papers. "That sep's concerning." That was the first crack. Not the loud kind, not the betrayal you can scream about. It was soft, almost polite. Thanksgiving came a month later. It was one of those years where the cold moved in before the calendar said it should. The leaves were already gone, the lawn frost-bitten. I cooked the turkey myself, just like every year. Margaret's recipe. Ellie insisted on bringing cranberry sauce to help, which mostly meant rearranging my kitchen like she already lived there. Jacob was late, as usual. He waltzed in just before dinner with that lopsided grin that used to melt me when he was 5. He hugged me, smelled faintly of whiskey, and said, "Don't a spit be mad, Dad, it seps the holidays." We sat down at the big oak table. Ellie poured wine like it was an Olympic sport. The fire crackled behind us. For a second I let myself believe it was just family again. A little cracked, a little bruised, but mine. Then Jacob raised his glass. His voice was soft, almost joking, but I know my son's tells. The vein in his neck twitched when he said it. "When this house is ours," he said, "I shall finally knock down that old library." He laughed. Ellie laughed too, but something inside me went still, like the house itself held its breath. Ellie rested a hand on my shoulder. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume. "Sharp, citrusy, artificial. You should let us help, Quinn," she said. You set are tired. For a moment, a stupid, half-second moment, I almost believed her. My body wanted to believe her. I'd spent 62 years keeping this family stitched together. My hands built that library. My hands installed the porch. My hands signed every check that kept this roof standing. And here they were, already speaking in past tense. Jacob shoveled mashed potatoes onto his plate, oblivious to the tremor behind my smile. He had no idea that the house he grew up in was already a battlefield. He just thought it was dinner. After they left that night, the house felt heavier. I walked through each room like I was cataloging memories before an auction. The library smelled like oak and old glue. The mantel over the fireplace had Margaret's photo from 1991, the one where she's laughing with her head thrown back. I whispered to the walls, "Not yet." 2 nights later, I found the first proof. An envelope from the Cooperstown clerk's office was wedged between circulars in my mailbox. It wasn't addressed to me. Not really. It said current resident. Inside was a change of address confirmation. Signed in blue ink, my name, my forged signature. Ellie's handwriting has a particular curl on her lowercase h. Always has. It was right there, neat as day. I slipped that envelope into my desk drawer. Under the ledger, underlined the date in red, October 27th, 2018. The next morning, Ellie called. "Hey," she said. "Breezy, I was thinking maybe you should let me handle some of the paperwork for the house. You stare not getting younger." I played dumb. "What paperwork?" She hesitated, just long enough for me to hear the smile falter. "You know, utilities, mail, things like that." That's when I realized something I wish I'd understood earlier. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself with shouting. Sometimes it shows up with gentle hands and the wrong kind of smile. That Thanksgiving, I didn't say a word. Not when Jacob joked about knocking down the library. Not when Ellie stacked the dishes in my kitchen like she was reorganizing her home. Not even when I noticed the pile of my mail in her purse. But that night, when I locked the front door, the brass key felt cold against my palm. I stood at the foot of the staircase I designed 32 years ago, the one with Margaret Sepp's favorite mahogany railing, and said to myself, "This is the last autumn I trust them." The next chapter of my life didn't start with a bang. It started with a missing bill and a forged curl on an H. But make no mistake, that was the beginning of the end. Because once you see the shape of betrayal, you can't unsee it. And when you've built your life brick by brick, you know exactly which ones to pull out to make the whole thing fall. The winter of 2019 was the first time I realized that survival doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means stepping back quietly enough that the walls start talking without you in the room. January came in with a sheet of ice over Otsego Lake, and the house felt different. I used to love the way winter wrapped around this place. The creak of the porch under fresh snow, the way the radiators hissed like old friends. But that year the silence pressed harder. The betrayal hadn't exploded yet. It was still soft, simmering like a slow leak under a floorboard. I remember sitting across from my cardiologist, Dr. Feldman, at Bassett Medical on January 15th. He sits one of those no-nonsense men with glasses that hang too low on the bridge of his nose. He flipped through my chart, tapped a page, and said, "Mr. Harper, your blood pressure sips a freight train." I said, "I know." He leaned forward. "Stress will kill you faster than age." Ellie called that night. "You should let me handle the utilities," she said again, like she was offering me kindness. Jacob had just co-signed something he barely read. I'd find out weeks later it was a joint authorization form tied to my 401k. I was still holding the phone when I noticed something I'd missed before. Her tone wasn't coaxing anymore. It was settled, like someone who's already moved the furniture in their head. February 3rd, a Monday. I logged into my 401k account after avoiding it for weeks. I've always been meticulous. But grief has a way of dulling edges. The balance was short, $26,000 short. I stared at the transaction log, the way you stare at a burned bridge. Withdrawal, $26,000. Transfer to joint authorization sub-account. Authorized by Jacob Harper. I didn't yell. I didn't even call him right away. I printed the page on my old HP LaserJet, slid it into a manila folder, wrote the date on the tab in block letters, FAB03 2019. The ink bled a little from the heat vent, but the paper felt solid in my hand. Real. The next night, I asked Jacob to meet me at Benny's Diner. Same red vinyl booth we'd sat in a dozen times when he was a kid, his shoes not touching the floor. He showed up in a flannel jacket, smelling faintly of cigarettes and guilt. He ordered pancakes like he always did when he didn't want to talk. I didn't show him the printout. I just said, "Why?" He didn't set to look at me. He cut into his pancakes, tiny perfect squares. Like when he was 8. Ellie told me it was fine, he said finally. You weren't using it. I felt something cold and clean settle inside me. Not rage, not even hurt, just clarity. I paid the check, $23.18. Left the receipt on the table, folded once. I kept the carbon copy in my coat pocket like a talisman. 2 days later, I met Howard James at a diner off Route 28. He's been my lawyer for 27 years. He drafted the deed with me back when Margaret and I first bought the land in '89. We were sitting across from each other in the corner booth, the one that smelled like burnt toast. Howard stirred his black coffee exactly 3 times, looked up and said, "If you want the truth, Quinn, stop being in the room." I frowned. What do you mean? You start giving them a stage. You standing there is what keeps the curtain down. He leaned in, voice low. Step away. Let the play run. That was the moment the idea took shape. Not a con, not a fake death, just absence. Quiet, surgical absence. We spent 3 weeks planning, not plotting. Every move, lawful, methodical, timed like an architect's blueprint. First, I transferred the house into a revocable trust. Howard structured it so I kept full control. No surprises, no backdoors. Every document was signed in ink at the Otsego County Clerk's office on February 24th. Stamped at 10:42 a.m., I still have the clerk's faint perfume on the corner of the carbon paper. Then came the cameras. I wasn't looking for drama. I wanted clarity. Ruth Delgado, retired PI friend of Howard's, installed 5 legal nanny cams in shared spaces while I still lived there. Kitchen, living room, mudroom, library, and the upstairs hall. Audio disabled. Fully legal in New York as long as you own the home and notify yourself. She logged the serial numbers into a sealed chain of custody file. The brass key never left my pocket. March 1st. I packed 3 bags, 2 clothes, 1 documents. I rented a small room at the Millstone Inn, 8 miles away. Room 7, top floor. View of the frozen lake, $92 a night. Paid weekly. No forwarding address. I told no one except Howard and Ruth. Ellie called 3 times the next week. I didn't answer. Jacob texted me once. Everything okay? Ellie says you such are tired. That last word, tired, hit like a cold coin against my teeth. It was the same word she'd used at Thanksgiving. The same word she'd repeated every time she wanted me to hand her something. I let the phone buzz against the table, screen lighting up like a silent alarm. Then I flipped it face down. March 8th, Jacob called again. His voice was softer this time, smaller. Dad, just checking in. Are you okay? There was a part of me, the foolish fatherly part, that almost cracked. I could hear the boy who used to ask me to keep the hallway light on because he was scared of the dark. I could hear the son I built this house for. But then, faint in the background, I heard Ellie Sepp's voice. Sharp, clipped. She said, "Hang up." And he did. I sat in the dim motel room with the radiator hissing like a sleeping beast, listening to the silence they left me with. It didn't hurt the way I expected. It just felt honest. By the end of March, I was a ghost inside my own life. The house still looked occupied. Mail forwarding quietly rerouted, lawn service paid in advance. Smart lock untouched. But in the eyes of my family, I was fading. Conveniently, Ellie started forwarding utility notices to herself. She called Martha Lee, my neighbor, and told her I was taking time to rest. She said it sweetly, like a saint with dirty hands. Ruth's footage from March 19th shows Ellie walking through my living room like a queen returning to her throne. She flicked on the light, ran her palm over the banister again, and smiled. Jacob trailed behind, looking at the floor. It wasn't possession yet, but it was rehearsal. I kept a ledger of everything: dates, calls, withdrawals. I stored copies in two places: a fireproof box under the floorboard of room 7, and a safety deposit box at Community Bank, box number 112B, red folder. No one knew. The trick wasn't set rage, it was stillness. When people think you've disappeared, they stop pretending. I walked by the house once in late March, just after sunset. The snow had melted into muddy streaks along the driveway. Through the living room window, I saw them: Ellie in my armchair, Jacob laughing at something on TV. For a second, I could almost believe they were a family, just not mine. I slid my brass key between my fingers and whispered to the cold air, "I sense still here." I didn't fake my death. I just stopped being in the room. The thing about houses is they remember. The wood remembers every nail you drove into it. The walls remember every word whispered too close to midnight. But they can also forget you, slowly, like a photograph left too long in the sun. By fall of 2019, my house didn't look at me the same way anymore. The brass key still turned in the lock, but it was turning into a door that didn't belong to me. I'd been living at the Millstone Inn for 6 months by then. Room 7. The same creaky floorboard by the radiator. The same steady sound of trucks on Route 28. The town had rolled into its orange and red costume again. October in Cooperstown does that. Makes everything look softer than it is. But when you're watching your house from a distance, autumn isn't beautiful. It's a border. Ellie had the key now. Jacob had the alarm code, and I had silence. On October 14th, I parked 2 blocks down from Glen Avenue just after sunset. I didn't need to get close. The cameras were doing their job. I watched from my laptop, the tiny feed window glowing like a single eye in the dark. There she was, Ellie, stepping into my living room like she was home. She'd pulled her hair back, a habit she had when she wanted control. Jacob trailed behind, carrying 2 grocery bags like a teenager helping his mother. She put the groceries on the counter. He sat in my chair in the study. That chair isn't just furniture. It's a monument. I bought it in 1991, the week after Margaret told me we were going to try for a baby. I spent nights there sketching blueprints for houses I'll never build again. Watching Jacob sink into it like it was nothing felt like a hand closing around my throat. I clicked the audio log closed, not because I couldn't watch, but because I didn't need to hear their laughter. I'd already heard enough. October 28th, 2019. The day the house officially forgot me. Howard called at 2:43 p.m. I still remember the number flashing on my prepaid phone. His voice was flat, deliberate, the way he gets when things are about to matter. "Quinn," he said, "they filed a power of attorney. Durable, in your name." I froze in that motel chair, the radiator ticking like a slow metronome. Otsego County Clerk's office. "Recorded this morning. Stamped, filed." I whispered. That's not mine." "I know," he said. "We've already pulled the copy." 2 hours later, Ruth sent me a photo of the document. It was a forged durable POA. My name, my signature. Not my hand. Ellie's handwriting has that tell, the lowercase that hooks upward at the tail like a snake flicking its tongue. I'd seen it once on a change of address card. Now it was on a legal instrument. Filed October 28th, 2019. Instrument number 2019 4583. I still remember every digit. I slid the printed copy into the red evidence folder in my deposit box, labeled it in my own handwriting. Forged POA, October 28th, 19. No exclamation marks. Just fact. While they sat in my house drinking tea and playing family, Howard was already planting stakes in the ground. We didn't move fast. We moved right. Martha Lee, my neighbor of 31 years, knocked on my motel door the next evening with my mail in her hands. She's got a soft way of saying hard things. She pressed the stack into my palm and said, "I thought you should see this yourself." The top envelope was a delinquency notice for my property taxes. The forwarding address wasn't mine. The second envelope was from the electric company, unpaid balance. Third, water utility. Fourth, county tax escrow warning. They weren't paying anything. They were bleeding the house. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, sorting the envelopes into neat piles like autopsy evidence. I pulled out my ledger, wrote the date at the top of a fresh page, October 29th, 2019. Then one by one I logged each notice, each amount. County tax delinquency $3,912.75. Electric $281.63. Water 146.20 tellers. I underlined the total twice in black ink. $4,340.58. They were running the house dry while talking about family. That night I walked to Glen Avenue. I didn't get close. I stood at the corner under the maple tree Margaret planted in 1992. Its leaves were burning orange under the streetlight, the same color as the day she handed me the shovel. Through the front window, I could see Ellie rearranging the living room. She moved the old cedar chest Margaret loved. She pushed my writing desk against the wall like it was clutter. Jacob was on his phone, laughing at something. It was like watching strangers build a life inside your bones. Ruth handled the surveillance transfers with military precision. Every frame from every camera was burned to write once discs, stored in duplicate. One copy stayed with her in a locked case. The other went to Howard's evidence archive. Chain of custody. Date stamped. Signed. We were building something quiet. Not an ambush, a record. On November 2nd, Howard met me at the diner again. Black coffee, legal pad. They sipped her making moves faster than I expected, he said. That POA gives them leverage on paper. But only on paper. On paper, I repeated. Exactly. It settles forged. They think you have tur out of the picture. They settles make mistakes. I leaned back in the booth, feeling the vinyl press against my shoulders. Good, I said. Let them. Every lie has an expiration date. You just have to let it ripen. Jacob started bringing more of his stuff into the house that month. Ruth's footage caught him moving boxes into my study. It's strange. I didn't feel rage watching it. I felt distance, like watching old footage of a family you used to be in. Kelly had the mail redirected. She started collecting packages at the door. She signed her name on delivery slips like she'd always lived there. And the house, my house, let her. I used to think houses were loyal. I was wrong. Houses don't choose sides. They follow whoever holds the key. On November 14th, I watched the footage of her turning my key in the front door. She paused, just before pushing it open like she was savoring it. I felt something crack inside me, quiet, clean, not the kind of pain that bleeds, the kind that settles. Howard was patient. Ruth was methodical. Martha was watchful. And me? I was disappearing more by the day. We decided then, no confrontation, no warning. Let the rope tighten itself. By the first snow, the house didn't remember my footsteps anymore. Ellie's perfume lingered in the halls I built with Margaret. Jacob's jacket hung on the hook where my work coat used to be. The lights flicked on at 6 p.m. every night like clockwork, their clock, not mine. I sat by the window in room 7, watching the snow fall over Cooperstown. The house's porch light glowed in the distance, faint and golden like a memory I couldn't touch. It wasn't set mine anymore. Not yet. But they didn't set know I was still listening. February 2020 didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in, thin, bitter air. Lake frozen so hard the ice fishermen dragged their chairs out before sunrise. I woke every morning at the Millstone Inn to the sound of wind knifing through the cracks in the window frame. By then, 6 months had passed since I'd stepped out of that house. 6 months of silence, of watching, of letting them believe I was fading. Howard had a saying he used whenever things got too loud in my head. When people think you start gone, they stop pretending. I didn't fully understand it until the winter I disappeared without leaving. Ellie began whispering to neighbors that I was declining. Not sick, not dead. Declining, the polite word people use when they want to clear space before you're actually gone. Martha told me she overheard her on a Tuesday morning, leaning over the fence, coffee cup in hand, saying, "He's not well. He's not himself anymore. It's only a matter of time." She said it like she was talking about a storm moving through. February 8th, Saturday. Ruth sent me a time-stamped clip from the mudroom camera, Jacob coming in with Ellie both carrying folders. They laid them on the kitchen counter, my counter, and talked in the half-whisper of people planning something they think no one can hear. No audio, but I didn't need it. The way Ellie tapped the folder spine with her fingernail was the same way she used to signal our father she'd gotten her way. That folder was the beginning of the memorial dinner. She hosted it 2 weeks later, February 22nd, 2020. Saturday, 6 p.m. It's funny, or maybe cruel, how people can hold a funeral for someone who isn't dead. Ruth texted me 2 hours before it started. Motion sensors active, 23 heads at the door. Martha confirmed what she saw from her porch. She told people it was a celebration of your life, Quinn, like a wake without a coffin. I didn't answer. I was sitting at the small round table in my motel room with the red evidence folder open in front of me. Inside forged POA delinquency notices, my son's signature on the 401k withdrawal, date-stamped footage. All of it, piece by piece, was the story they were writing for me. Except it wasn't theirs to end. At 6:43 p.m., Ellie turned the porch light on. The guests started arriving. Old family friends, neighbors, Jacob's friends who used to run through my yard when they were kids. Ruth had parked legally 2 houses down, her camera angled on the front porch. Every arrival was logged, legally, methodically. Through the feed on my laptop, I watched them clink glasses and laugh in a house I'd built with my own hands. Ellie hung a black and white photo of me and Margaret over the fireplace. My portrait was placed on the mantel like an obituary, and on the coffee table, next to the cheese platter, was Margaret's favorite mug. It was a blue ceramic thing she bought at a street market in '92. She drank tea from it every morning until the day she couldn't anymore. Now it held white chrysanthemums, funeral flowers. They were already rewriting the story. Martha texted me from across the street at 7:02 p.m. She sips, telling them you sept not expected to return. That was the exact phrase. Jacob stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, nodding along like a man pretending not to drown. Ellie made a toast. No audio, but her gestures told me everything. She raised her glass, placed her hand on Jacob's shoulder, and they both smiled, like hosts, like heirs. And I was the ghost they were toasting to. Howard's legal strategy had already been in motion long before that night. Early February, he filed a notice of pendency on the property. That single filing was like pouring concrete around the house, invisible to them but impossible to break. No sale, no transfer, no sneaky quit-claim deed. The house was locked legally, even if I wasn't standing inside it. At 8:15 p.m., Ellie gave a little tour of the house. I watched on the hallway camera as she walked guests past the library, laughing like she'd won something. Someone must have asked her what she planned to do with the place, because she pointed toward the study and made a grand sweeping gesture. I didn't need the sound to know the word renovation was in her mouth. I'd spent nights drawing the blueprints for that room when Margaret was pregnant. I designed every inch of that library to keep our son surrounded by stories, by knowledge, by warmth, and there she was, auctioning it off with her smile. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I wrote it down. February 22nd, 2020, Memorial Dinner, 23 people. Toast made, renovation mention. It's easy to let betrayal consume you like fire, but it's harder and more useful to let it harden like stone. By 9:17 p.m., Jacob was outside with a cigarette. He never smoked in front of me when he was a teenager. Now he smoked on my porch like it was his. Ruth logged it. Ellie walked out after him, wrapped her coat around her shoulders, and handed him an envelope. He opened it, laughed, and that laughter cut cleaner than any confession. I closed the laptop. I seen enough. The next morning, Cooperstown was silent under a thin layer of snow. I drove down Glen Avenue just after dawn. Nobody saw me. I parked across from Martha's house, engine off. The house still had string lights around the porch from the night before. In the living room window, the flowers in Margaret's mug were still standing straight. I whispered to the windshield, "You buried me." Howard called at 11:02 a.m. sharp. "That's done," he said. "The notice of pendency is filed. Title is frozen until a court orders otherwise. If they try anything, it bounces." "Good," I said. "Quinn," he added, voice softer now. This is not just about keeping a house. I didn't just answer. But I knew what he meant. That house wasn't just a roof. It was 28 years of memories poured into drywall. It was Margaret's laugh in the kitchen, Jacob's first steps on the porch, late nights drafting plans with ink-stained fingers. It was everything that came before Ellie's whispering. Howard and I met at the diner 2 days later. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table, stamped, signed, filed. This, he said, is the wall they want see coming. The legal wall. Clean, quiet, unbreakable. On February 29th, a leap year day, I walked past the house again. No lights on, snow piling at the corners of the porch. The house looked peaceful, like a body before the autopsy. Inside that house, they'd planned my funeral. But outside, in the courthouse, they'd already locked their own cage. They thought they buried me. What they really did was close the door behind themselves. March 5th, 2020. A Thursday. The night they gave speeches about me like I was a chapter they'd already closed. When people talk about betrayal, they usually imagine shouting, confrontation. But betrayal has a quieter shape. It's laughter at a table you built. It's your own son making plans for a house you still legally own. It's your sister practicing her victory speech before the war has even started. The memorial dinner wasn't enough for Ellie. She wanted a grander finale, something formal, a last supper with no corpse at the table, and Jacob, my only son, stood right next to her, helping set the plates. Ruth had warned me the day before. She sent out invitations, she said, over the phone, handwritten, like she sits hosting a wedding. The guest list was smaller this time, 17 people, more selective, just the ones she needed to impress. Family friends, a realtor, and 2 people I didn't recognize until later, a contractor and a woman from a brokerage in Wananta. She wasn't just celebrating, she was laying the foundation for a sale. The table was set with Margaret's china. I'd stored that set for decades. She used it only twice. Once on our anniversary, once the night Jacob graduated college. Ellie pulled it out like it was hers. Ruth had the porch camera fixed at a wide angle that night. Every person stepping through the door was recorded with timestamp overlays. The law doesn't care about feelings, it cares about facts. And that's exactly what I was collecting. Inside, they poured wine, made jokes, played soft jazz on the Bluetooth speaker Jacob had once given me for Father's Day. At 7:21 p.m., Jacob stood at the end of the table with his hands in his pockets, leaning against the chair that should have been mine. He raised his glass. Dad always said this house was built to last, he began. His voice was steady, too steady, and it will, even without him. A ripple of laughter. Ellie smiled like a queen who'd just watched her rival fall. Jacob went on, talking about fresh starts and new chapters. But what cut the deepest wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't say. Not once did he call it my house. Every word was about the house, detached, clinical, like I was a line item on a title sheet. I closed the laptop in the motel room for a full minute, just to breathe. When I reopened it, Ellie was already in the living room, champagne flute in hand, signing papers with a man in a navy blazer, the realtor. Later I'd learn his name, Dennis Parker, Wananta Realty. He held out a glossy engagement letter, and Ellie signed it with that little flourish at the end of her name. The same flourish she used when she signed that forged POA months before. Listing price, $1,600,000. My house, my land. The library Margaret loved. Ruth froze the footage on the moment her pen touched paper. She printed stills on archival stock, sealed them in evidence sleeves, and logged them into her chain of custody. It wasn't just proof of greed, it was the heartbeat of the entire case. Martha called me that night from her kitchen. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She sips really selling it, Quinn. She sips actually doing it. I said, let her. Because the thing about greed is that it always writes its own confession. You don't have to push, you just have to document the chapters. The next morning, March 6th, 2020, Ellie walked into the Otsego County Clerk's office at 10:07 a.m. with the realtor engagement letter in her hand and a forged POA on file. She intended to list the house under my name, pretending to act as my agent. But what she didn't know was that Howard's legal wall was already in place. The clerk stamped the quitclaim transfer submission, then 32 minutes later, rejected it. Signature mismatch. Flagged and logged. At 11:03 a.m., Howard texted me 2 words they tried. I was sitting in my car at the Millstone Inn parking lot. I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. A strange calm settled over me. Not joy, not anger, something steadier, like a door clicking shut exactly as planned. That afternoon, Ruth caught the moment Ellie came home to find the rejection slip taped to the front door by the courier. She ripped it off and read it twice. Jacob stood behind her, confused. She crumpled the paper, threw it onto the porch, and screamed. Not a polite whisper this time. A full, raw scream. Martha, standing on her porch across the street, heard every syllable. This was the first crack they felt. The second came the next day. March 7th, 2020, 4:26 p.m. Ellie called Martha, one-party consent in New York. Martha had my permission to record. Once the house sells, Ellie said, voice sharp. It's Seb's done. We set her out. He doesn't Seb need it. Seb's gone anyway. Martha sits breath caught. Ellie, she said carefully. He sits not dead. Silence. Then Ellie sips cold little laugh. Might as well be. That recording became Exhibit C in the case file. Ruth transferred the file to Howard's encrypted drive and notarized the chain. It was one of the cleanest pieces of evidence we'd get. By then, Howard had already prepared the order to show cause for an emergency temporary restraining order. Ellie didn't know it yet, but she was walking into a brick wall made of her own paperwork. And me? I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt steady, like a man watching dominoes fall that he'd carefully set up months before. That weekend, I drove past the house one more time. Dusk, porch, light flickering on. Jacob sat on the steps, elbows on his knees, looking down at his shoes. Ellie was inside on the phone, pacing. I couldn't hear her, but I didn't have to. Her body language was the same as every grifter who's just realized the cash isn't coming through. The library window glowed softly behind him. For years, that was the room I used to read to him in Treasure Island, The Hobbit, Tom Sawyer. He'd fall asleep in my lap. I watched him grow up under that soft lamplight. And now he sat in front of it, complicit in trying to erase it. Howard Sip's voice echoed in my head from weeks earlier. You don't said have to burn the house down. Just let them light the match themselves. I parked 2 blocks down, engine off, and let the quiet settle in. There's a kind of stillness that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like power. Ellie thought she'd built a perfect little world. Realtor, contract, fake authority. She never saw the legal wall. Greed makes people sloppy, and every sloppy move she made became another brick in the case against her. That night, I wrote a single line in my ledger before turning out the motel light. March 5th, 7/2020. They buried me twice. I just haven't risen yet. Summer 2020 arrived like a thief in the night. No warning, no permission, just heat rolling in over Cooperstown like a slow tide. The snow was gone, the lake thawed, and the house that once held my entire world now held 2 people pretending to be its owners. Ellie listed the house in early June. The realtor, Dennis Parker, posted wide-lens photos online, the kind that stretch every wall to make rooms look larger. The listing headline read, Historic 3-story on Glen Avenue, estate home $1.6 million, move-in ready. My name wasn't set on it, but the lie was, Jacob moved into the house full-time by mid-June. Ruth's footage caught him hauling in duffel bags, a small desk, even a gaming chair. He installed a flat screen in the study. My study. I watched him drag the chair across the hardwood floor. Margaret and I sanded by hand in 1990. The screech of wood against metal on the recording made something sharp curl in my chest. Ellie called contractors. 2, maybe 3. One wore a bright orange vest and measured the library walls with a laser level. She followed him around like a general surveying conquered land. Jacob trailed behind like a foot soldier too scared to question the orders. They acted like owners because in their minds they were But summer has a way of revealing cracks. Heat expands everything. Wood, metal, lies. The first crack arrived on June 19th, a Friday. Otsego County Clerk mailed formal notice of the notice of pendency. A single sheet of paper sent to the property's mailing address, which, thanks to Ellie's meddling months earlier, meant it landed directly in her hands. Ruth's camera on the porch captured it, 2:14 p.m. Postal carrier leaves a manila envelope. Jacob picks it up, hands it to Ellie. She tears it open, reads the top line. Notice of pendency, Supreme Court, County of Otsego, and freezes. Her smile dies in less than 3 seconds. Jacob asks something. She doesn't answer. She just folds the paper in half, like that'll change what it says. You can sit out charm a court filing. 2 days later, the second crack split through their confidence. June 21st, Sunday, 4:37 p.m. A process server from Albany arrived on the porch wearing a navy suit despite the heat. He knocked once, twice, then handed Ellie a thick stack of papers. Service of order to show cause and temporary restraining order. The brick wall finally hit her doorstep. Ruth recorded from across the street with a telephoto lens. Perfectly legal, no audio. Just a clear, clean shot of Ellie holding the envelope like it was a live grenade. Jacob asked, "What is it?" She didn't set answer right away. She just stared down at the top page like someone who finally realized the game board wasn't set in hers. Then she snapped, "Nothing you need to worry about." But the camera doesn't care what she says. That evening, Ruth slipped me a USB drive. Inside, porch footage, time-stamped and watermarked. Howard was already waiting at the diner, black coffee in hand like always. I handed him the drive and he grinned, that slow, sharp grin he gets when a case begins to turn. "They're walking straight into the trap you didn't even have to bait," he said. The legal machine had started to turn. By early July, Parker, the realtor, tried to push forward with listing promotions, ignoring the notice, but the title search came back with the legal freeze. No one touches that house until the court speaks. I imagine his phone call with Ellie didn't go well. Ruth recorded her pacing on the porch on July 3rd, barefoot. Hair tied back. That's Ellie's tell when she's cornered. She always ties it back. She kept glancing at her phone, muttering. Jacob sat on the steps, staring at the lawn. Two people living in a castle they didn't own. And the cracks kept spreading. July 9th. Ellie missed the second utility payment. Electric amount due $478.16. July 14th. Water bill $312.40. She stopped paying because she thought ownership was inevitable. She never planned for resistance. But resistance was exactly what she got. Martha called me that week. She sipped to seeing contractors leaving. "She looks rattled," Martha said. Jacob sips quiet. It sips like they defer waiting for something bad to happen. I replied, "They are." Jacob stopped showing up to the weekly planning dinners Ellie held. Ruth's cameras caught him leaving the house mid-argument on July 17th. He slammed the front door so hard it rattled the old stained glass window above it. Margaret loved that window. I used to trace the colored panes with her at night when Jacob was a baby. Now it was shaking because my son couldn't stand the kingdom his aunt had built. Greed always devours its soldiers first. Ellie tried calling me twice that month. I didn't set answer. Her voicemails were polite at first. "Hey Quinn, just checking in. Hope you set you're okay." Then more clipped. "Quinn, we need to talk about the house." I didn't owe her a single syllable. Howard filed a motion to intervene as trust holder in late July. Every document she'd forged, every piece of paper she'd signed, was now moving through the same court system she thought she could bypass. Paper doesn't lie. Not when the signatures don't match. Jacob avoided her for the last 2 weeks of July. He spent more time at a friend's house across town. He didn't know it yet, but he'd already chosen a side. Ruth called me one evening, July 26th. Her voice calm but sharp. "You can feel it," she said. "They sept you're cracking." I drove down Glen Avenue just before midnight. The porch light was off. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the study, the same library Jacob once wanted to tear down. Through the window, Ellie sat alone at the kitchen table, papers spread around her like a battlefield she couldn't win anymore. Jacob wasn't home. The house was silent. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't have to. The walls were doing the work for me. When people build a kingdom on stolen ground, they never expect the ground to fight back. July turned to August. Court filings stacked up. Howard prepped for the motion hearing. Ellie's kingdom grew quieter. Fewer cars in the driveway. Contractors gone. Realtor quiet. Even Jacob's laughter was gone from the porch. The house had started to echo again. An echo is just another word for empty. On August 12th, I sat in the diner with Howard, the same corner booth where this plan was born. He tapped the thick case folder, grinned, and said, "This is what it looks like when the walls start leaning back." I leaned back, stirred my coffee, and said, "Let them hear the creak." The truth wasn't just coming anymore. It was already in their mailbox, their driveway, their silence. The cracks in their kingdom were no accident. I built the foundation myself. I knew exactly where to hit. January 12th, 2021, Tuesday. The day my name came back to life. The snow in Cooperstown had turned the courthouse steps into pale stone mirrors. The air was sharp enough to bite. I stood across the street at 8:54 a.m., my breath fogging the glass of the rental car window. The brass key, the same one Ellie thought was useless now, lay in my coat pocket, warm from the heat of my hand. This was the day everything we'd built in silence became noise. Otsego County Supreme Court, Equity Part. 9:30 a.m. on the docket. Harper v. Harper, caption in black ink, neat serif font, printed on official paper, the kind of document that outlives gossip. Ellie and Jacob walked up the steps just before 9 o'clock. She wore a black wool coat with a silk scarf knotted like a victory ribbon. He looked pale, underdressed, nervous. Their lawyer, a man named Richard Flanagan, real estate attorney from Albany, followed behind with a leather briefcase. He didn't know yet that the house he thought was their golden ticket was actually a loaded trap. Ruth stood on the sidewalk with Martha, both pretending to be casual observers. Howard was already inside, jacket folded neatly over his arm, case file organized like a surgeon's instruments. I didn't move until Ellie crossed the threshold. Then I stepped out into the cold, pulled the door open, and walked in after them. No fanfare, no warning. The clerk called the case at 9:32 a.m. sharp. Ellie and Jacob sat on the left side of the courtroom, facing forward, shoulders stiff. Their lawyer whispered something into Ellie's ear. She nodded too fast. Howard stood. "Your Honor," he said calmly. "The petitioner is present." Judge Emerson, a tall woman with wire-framed glasses and the patience of granite, looked up. "Mr. Harper?" I rose from the second row. The sound that left Ellie's throat wasn't quite a gasp, more like a soft, involuntary choke. Jacob's head snapped toward me. His eyes went wide, not with anger. Not at first, with shame. I walked to the front, every step measured. My shoes echoed against the polished tile like clock ticks. For months, I had been a ghost. That morning, I walked into the courtroom like a man. Howard began with the facts. He didn't need theatrics. He had paper, and paper has more teeth than rage. "Your Honor," he said, sliding the first exhibit onto the bench. Exhibit, a clerk SIP's rejection slip dated March 6, 2020. Attempted quitclaim deed, signature mismatch. Flanagan shifted in his chair. Exhibit B, Howard continued. Realtor engagement letter, one onto realty, signed under a forged power of attorney, February 2020. He placed the second document down. Crisp, chronological. "Exhibit C," he said, voice still calm. Recorded phone call between Eleanor Harper and Martha Lee, March 7th, 2020. One-party consent admissible. Statement of intent to sell petitioner Siptus property without his consent. He didn't need to quote the line, but he did anyway. Once the house sells, it's sesh done. He doesn't sesh need it. He does gone anyway. Ellie flinched. Howard opened the binder like a magician, revealing nothing but reality. Exhibit D, bank statements. $310,000 in unauthorized withdrawals between January and March 2019, traced to a joint authorization account opened by Jacob Harper. Jacob's jaw tightened. He stared down at his hands. Howard laid out Exhibit E. Trust documents. Exhibit E. Notary logs proving I was in another county when the forged POA was filed. Exhibit G. Surveillance timestamps. Legally obtained before I left the house. Piece by piece, like bricks. The wall came up. Flanagan tried to object on relevance, but Judge Emerson raised a hand. "Counselor," she said, voice as calm as ice, "your clients have a serious problem." The gallery was silent. The only sound was the soft rustle of pages and the faint hum of the heater. I'd thought about this moment for months, about whether I'd feel triumphant, furious, maybe even vindicated, but standing there listening to Howard walk through every step of their betrayal, I didn't feel any of those things. I felt steady. The way a house feels when the foundation finally locks into place. "Mr. Harper," the judge said, turning toward me, "do you have anything to add?" I stepped forward. "Your Honor," I said. My voice didn't shake. "They buried me while I was still alive. They took my name off mail. They signed papers. They held a memorial dinner in my house. I didn't want revenge. I wanted silence. And in that silence, they told me exactly who they are." Ellie didn't look at me. Jacob did. And in that look, I saw every version of him. The little boy in the library, the man on the porch with a cigarette, the son who didn't stop his aunt. Howard handed the judge the final piece, the trust. The deed was never theirs. It had never moved. Legally, the house never left my name. Judge Emerson didn't take long. 10 minutes. She flipped through the exhibits, page by page. Then she looked up. "The court finds," she began, "that the power of attorney was forged. The attempted conveyance is void. All instruments executed under that document are void. Assets traced to the unauthorized withdrawals are subject to freeze and restitution." Flanagan tried one last soft objection. The judge shut it down with a raised eyebrow. She turned to Ellie and Jacob. "You are not owners of this property," she said. "You were never owners of this property. The petitioner is alive, competent, and the lawful title holder. I set referring this matter to the District Attorney Seppa's office for review of potential criminal conduct." The words didn't crash into them. They landed slowly, like ice freezing over a river. Ellie whispered, "This isn't set fair." The judge didn't respond. She didn't have to. She signed the order at 10:41 a.m. sharp, clean strokes. The pen didn't hesitate. Ellie stared at the table, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. Jacob leaned back in his chair, pale. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Outside the courtroom, just before the door opened, I hesitated for half a second, not because I doubted the outcome. The evidence was a fortress. I hesitated because I remembered the smell of the library when Jacob was 6, the weight of him falling asleep on my lap while I read Treasure Island. He asked me once, "Dad, what happens when pirates betray each other?" I said they end up alone. Ellie brushed past me without a word, heels striking the tile like gunshots. Jacob lingered a moment. His eyes flicked to mine, not asking for forgiveness, not even offering an apology, just seeing me, really seeing me for the first time in years. I said nothing. Ruth was waiting by the courthouse door with Martha. Howard followed behind me, file under his arm, satisfied but not smug. We didn't celebrate. We didn't need to. The house was mine. It had always been mine. The law had simply caught up to the truth. Snow fell lightly as we stepped outside, each flake vanishing into the ground before it could stick. The courthouse doors shut behind Ellie and Jacob like the end of a play. Their kingdom was gone. Their script burned. All that was left was reality. That morning I walked in a ghost. By noon I walked out a man with a name that was never theirs to steal. The morning after the courtroom, the house didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a ghost exhaling. January 13th, 2021, Wednesday. Cooperstown was frozen in that bleak post-storm silence, the kind where snow clings to tree branches like pale veins. I pulled into the driveway at 7:42 a.m. for the first time in more than 2 years. The wheels of the rental car crunched over ice. The brass key sat between my fingers, its edges smooth from a lifetime of turning locks. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, memory just inflates what love built. The front porch still creaked on the left step. The cedar siding still wore the faint scrape from the snowblower Jacob rammed into it when he was 14. Margaret's maple tree leaned over the roof like it had every winter since 1992. But something about it was quieter. Not peaceful. Empty. I stepped onto the porch and turned the key. Click. The smart lock Ellie installed had been legally reset after the court order. My key still fit the old brass deadbolt beneath it. The house opened with the sound of hinges remembering me. Inside, it smelled wrong. Not like smoke or mildew, worse. Foreign. Like a hotel room you didn't book. The kitchen counter was cluttered with cheap ceramic mugs that weren't mine. A dull gray rug lay where Margaret's blue one used to be. Jacob's gaming chair was still in the study, its wheels cutting small grooves into the hardwood floor. I'd refinished with my own hands in 1990. Ruth and Howard had advised me to have a locksmith meet me, but I wanted the first step back to be mine. No audience, no witnesses, just me in the house. I stood in the kitchen and closed my eyes. For years this had been the room where Margaret hummed under her breath while making soup, where Jacob sat on the counter with his legs swinging, where Ellie once helped decorate for Christmas before everything she touched turned to calculation. Now it was silent. The kind of silence that's heavier than noise. At 8:05 a.m. Martha knocked softly on the door like she used to when she'd bring over pies in the 90s. She held one in her hands. Pecan, still warm. She smiled, but her eyes held the weight of everything she'd seen from her porch. "I never thought I'd see you back here like this," she said quietly. I set the pie on the counter, the warmth bleeding through the foil. "Me neither." She looked around the kitchen. "It doesn't set smell right in here." "No," I said. "It doesn't set." Martha nodded once, like she understood more than I accepted ever need to explain. Then she handed me a folded envelope. "From the clerk's office, certified. Your name sepsid back on everything." It wasn't about the deed. It was the final punctuation mark at the end of their lie. After she left, I walked through each room like a man cataloging a battlefield after the soldiers have gone home. In the mudroom, Ellie's coat still hung on a hook. I pulled it down, folded it neatly, and set it by the door for disposal. In the hallway, I noticed the faint outline where family photos used to hang. They'd stripped the frames, but the ghostly rectangles remained on the wall like scars. The library stopped me cold. The gaming chair sat in the middle of the room like an uninvited guest. Boxes of Jacob's things, clothes, electronics, nonsense, were stacked against the wall. The window seat where Margaret used to read was covered in a gray blanket that didn't belong. But under all of that clutter, the bones of the room were still mine. I traced my fingers along the bookshelf I built with Margaret the year Jacob was born. The grooves in the wood were still there, soft and familiar. I whispered, "I sept him home." Ellie hadn't returned any calls since the ruling. Not that I expected her to. Ruth told me Jacob had driven away the night before after the courthouse. No forwarding address, no bags left behind. That's what shame does. It doesn't stick around to clean up the mess. I opened the fridge. Empty except for a half-used carton of oat milk and a jar of salsa. It didn't feel like home yet. It felt like the aftermath of someone else's story. At 10:17 a.m., Ruth arrived with a black evidence binder 3 inches thick. She placed it on the kitchen counter with a soft thud. "This," she said, "is everything." Inside were the receipts of betrayal, the forged POA, the realtor contract, the utility delinquencies, audio transcripts, screenshots, the judge's signed order, exhibit after exhibit. Their story on paper stripped of charm. I ran my fingers over the bindercep's spine. "Feels heavier than it should." She smirked. So did their lie. We didn't talk much after that. Ruth was good at silence, the kind that holds its own weight. She gave me a small nod, then left me alone in the house that finally had my name back on it. At 9:13 p.m. that night, The phone rang. Jacob. I stared at the caller ID until the last ring, then picked it up. His voice cracked on the second word. Dad? I didn't say anything. I messed up, he said. I let her talk me into everything. I exhaled slowly. No, I said, you didn't let her. You helped her. Silence on the line, not defensive, just broken. Then I said it, not with anger, not with triumph, just truth. You can keep what never belonged to you, make it right. His breath caught. He didn't argue, just whispered, I'm sorry, and hung up. The house hummed in the silence after the call. The heating system kicked on, the pipes groaned, the maple trees scratched against the siding. Sounds I used to take for granted. It didn't sound like betrayal anymore. It just sounded like a house again. I locked the front door at 10:02 p.m. The porch light washed over the snow. No footsteps on the walkway. No laughter. No scheming whispers. The kitchen was quiet. Not the suffocating quiet of 2018. Not the haunted quiet of 2020. A clean quiet. An earned one. Grief has many shapes. So does justice. This wasn't a grand finale. It was a return. I sat in the library with the pie Martha brought. A single lamp on, the walls holding their breath like they remembered me again. I leaned back in the chair and whispered, Welcome home. March 2021 came quietly. No dramatic music, no loud announcements. Just a letter from the Otsego County District Attorney's Office, folded twice and slid into a plain white envelope postmarked March 4th. The header was printed in that sharp black serif font I'd seen 1,000 times during my career as an architect, dealing with zoning boards. This time, though, it wasn't about blueprints or construction permits. It was about blood, about signatures that didn't belong to them, about a house that had outlasted their lies. I unfolded the letter at my kitchen counter. The new clean rug Martha helped me pick out sat beneath my feet. The radiator hissed gently against the morning cold. The people of the state of New York versus Eleanor Harper. 2 counts, forgery in the second degree. 1 count, offering a false instrument for filing. Recommended restitution, $310,000. Ellie didn't just lose the house. She was about to lose the little empire she built on my absence. Ruth had told me weeks earlier that the DA's office moved quickly once Judge Emerson referred the matter. The forged POA, the recorded phone call, the bank trail. It wasn't just a civil betrayal anymore. It was criminal. March 10th, 2021, Wednesday. I sat on the same courthouse bench I'd avoided for years, this time not as a ghost, not as a man defending his name, but as a witness. Ellie arrived flanked by her lawyer. Gone was the silk scarf, the confidence, the little smirk. She looked like someone who'd finally read the last page of a book she didn't write. The DA offered a plea deal, restitution and probation, no prison time, but a felony record. A permanent scar. She hesitated. She looked at Jacob in the back of the courtroom because, yes, he came. His shoulders slumped forward like someone trying to shrink into the wood paneling. Ellie's lawyer whispered to her. She nodded once, then twice. And that was it. Years of quiet betrayal condensed into the sound of a pen scratching across a plea agreement. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. She pled guilty to 1 count of forgery. The other charges were folded into the restitution agreement. $310,000 to be repaid over 15 years. 5 years of probation. Mandatory financial ethics counseling. No more hidden signatures. No more forged authority. When she signed her name that day, it was finally her signature, not mine. Jacob didn't speak to her after the hearing. He didn't speak to me either. He just walked past me in the hallway, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. I could have said something. A fatherly line, a memory, a warning, but silence carried more weight. I walked outside, into the cold March air, and looked up at the courthouse windows. Snowflakes floated down slowly, thin and almost shy. I thought about the night I moved out in 2019, when my own house stopped feeling like mine. I thought about the brass key, the quiet cameras, the pie on the counter. Every small piece had led to this quiet, legal strike, Howard met me on the steps. His scarf was half tucked into his jacket, his hands buried in his coat pockets. She signed, he said. I know. She sell pay. She already has, I replied. He nodded. No smile, just understanding. Howard was never the kind of man who celebrated victory like a game. He treated it like engineering, measured, precise, inevitable. Ruth joined us a minute later. She handed me a thin envelope with the restitution schedule and a photocopy of the signed plea. Her PI instincts made everything tangible. This is the paper they can't charm their way out of, she said. The restitution breakdown was surgical. $50,000 lump sum from Ellie's remaining account. $260,000 in structured payments garnished. Interest clauses. Automatic lien if she missed a single installment. She'd tried to steal my house. Now she'd spend the next decade paying it back. Not to me directly, but to the court. It wasn't vengeance. It was accountability dressed in paperwork. March 19th. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and the binder Ruth had given me 2 months earlier. For the first time, I didn't need to open it. The evidence didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the system. It was doing its work without me. Jacob called that night. It wasn't set like the last call. His voice was steadier. I met with the DA, he said quietly. I spun signing the repayment plan for my part. His part was smaller, the unauthorized withdrawals he'd made under Ellie's persuasion, $27,000 total. He wasn't charged, but the civil repayment schedule was signed and notarized. I don't expect anything, I told him. I know, he said. But I need to. He didn't apologize. Not exactly. But something in his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. I didn't forgive him. Not in that moment. Forgiveness isn't a door you fling open. It's a hinge that moves slowly, or not at all. The next day, the trust reinstatement order was finalized. My name, Quinn Harper, slid back onto the title like it had never left. The clerk stamped the papers at 2:36 p.m. I stood at the counter, watching the stamp hit the page, and felt something shift in my chest. Not a rush, a release. Martha came over that evening with 2 cups of coffee. I saw the news, she said. Ellie pled? She did. She sell pay. I nodded. Not just in money. We sat at the kitchen counter, the same spot where Margaret used to sit with me when we were too young to realize how fragile everything can be. The counter was the same. The house was the same. Only the players had changed. Howard called later to confirm that the DA SIP's office had filed the plea officially. This is done, he said. You set her clear. Clear. That was the word I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. When the sun set that night, it hit the front windows of the house just right, the kind of light Margaret used to love. The maple tree's branches cast shadows across the floor. The heating pipes clicked softly. It wasn't perfect, nothing about this was, but it was mine again. Revenge stories like to end with fireworks, but real justice sounds more like paperwork being filed, like quiet breaths in a house that remembers your name. I didn't burn them, I didn't scream, I just stood still long enough for the truth to catch up. Ellie once told me, years ago, this house will outlive all of us. She was right. It did. Spring arrived late that year. April 2021 crept into Cooperstown like a soft apology after a brutal winter. The snow melted off the roof in slow drips, one patient drop at a time, like the house itself was thawing out with me. I stood at the edge of the front yard at 8:03 a.m., hands in my jacket pockets, watching sunlight push its way through the maple branches. It was the same tree Margaret planted with me in 1992, back when the house still smelled like fresh paint and coffee, back when the future felt solid. I hadn't made any big changes yet. The house was still the house, a little worn, still breathing. But I had plans now, not for revenge, not for anyone else, just for me. The library was the first room I tackled. It had taken me weeks to clear out the things Ellie left behind. Boxes of cheap candles, mugs that weren't mine, a single cracked vase that looked like it came from a discount store. I donated what I could. The rest went into a dumpster. I didn't throw it out in anger. I did it like I was sweeping dust from a table I was finally ready to sit at again. The walls were still the same pale cream Margaret had chosen decades ago. They'd yellowed slightly with time, but under the morning sun they glowed warm. I ran my hand along the window frame and could still feel the faint groove of where Jacob had carved his initials when he was 9. I'd yelled at him for that back then. Now I traced those same letters like they were part of the house's spine. I hired a carpenter to refinish the floors. Same oak, same honey color. No changes. I didn't want a new house, I wanted my house back. April 15th, Thursday, 11:27 a.m. The carpenter sanded the floor while I stood on the porch drinking black coffee. The sound was rhythmic, steady, not harsh like demolition, soft like restoration. Ruth stopped by, leaned against the porch railing, and watched the work. "You are rebuilding," she said. I nodded. "Not the walls, just the air." She smiled. "It suits you." It did. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like something breathing with me instead of against me. The locks were changed again. New brass, keyed only to me. This time no spare keys in Ellie's purse. No forgotten copies with Jacob. Just me and a small envelope in the safe deposit box. I reset the alarm codes, updated the title file, and archived every legal document with Howard's firm. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about peace. One evening, April 21st, I found the old set of architectural blueprints in the basement. They were rolled up in a worn cardboard tube labeled in Margaret's handwriting, "Harper Home, Final Design." I sat on the floor, unrolled them slowly, and stared at the faint graphite lines I'd drawn more than 30 years ago. I fit designed this house for a life, not a war. I traced the lines of the library, the kitchen, the little reading nook by the back window. Margaret had written small notes in the margins. More light here, soft wood here, Jacob's room. Her handwriting felt like a voice in the room. For a long time, I just sat there on the basement floor with the plans stretched out around me. I wasn't thinking about Ellie's greed or Jacob's silence. I was thinking about the woman who built this with me, about the boy who grew up between these walls, about how something built right can survive what tries to rot it. Martha came by on a Saturday with a basket of flowers. "You need a porch again," she said, "not just steps." She wasn't wrong. The porch had been stripped bare when Ellie lived here. I rebuilt the railing myself over 2 weekends, sanding every plank until my hands ached. When I finally painted it white, the same shade it had been in 1995, the smell of fresh paint hit me like a photograph. Summer afternoons, lemonade, Margaret's bare feet on the wood. On May 2nd, I walked through the house in bare socks, letting the smooth floors warm beneath me. I passed the spot in the hallway where the family portraits used to hang. The ghost rectangles were gone now. I'd filled the space with one new frame, a black and white photo of Margaret sitting on the porch with Jacob in her lap, laughing. The rest of the walls I left bare, not because I had nothing else to hang, because I didn't need to. Jacob called a few times in those weeks. I didn't ignore him, but I didn't rush. Healing isn't a sprint. On May 12th, I finally picked up. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey." "I signed the second payment," he added. "The restitution thing." "Good." Silence stretched between us. Not angry, just fragile. "I know you don't owe me anything," Jacob said. "But if you ever want to talk or see me, I shall be here." I didn't promise anything. I just said, "Forgiveness is a blueprint, not a door. You lay the foundation. Maybe if the ground holds, you build from there. Maybe not. Either way, the foundation is yours." The oaks bloomed by late May. Bees hummed along the fence line. The town felt alive again after a long, strange winter. And so did the house. On June 1st, I hosted no one. No parties, no announcements. I just sat at the kitchen table with the windows open, the breeze moving through the house like an old friend. Martha waved from across the street. Ruth sent me a short text. "You did it." Howard stopped by that weekend. He didn't say much. Just looked around, nodded at the new porch railing, and said, "Looks right." "It is," I answered. "People think revenge ends with fireworks, or tears, or screaming. But what they never tell you is how quiet it can be when it's over. How still. the kind of stillness that lets you breathe without looking over your shoulder. I locked the door that night, just once, not twice. I didn't glance back. I didn't listen for footsteps on the porch. I sat on the library floor with Margaret's blueprints rolled out around me, not to plan a new house, just to remember why I built this one. You didn't lose me, I whispered into the wood beams. You gave me away. And then I smiled. Not because I'd won, because I'd come home. Summer 2021. Cooperstown was green again. Not just the grass or the trees, but the kind of green that hums, the kind that presses against the windows like it's alive. The house felt different now. It wasn't louder, it wasn't quieter, it was honest. July 2nd. I stood at the kitchen sink just after sunrise, a mug of black coffee warming my hand, watching light move across the floorboards. It reached the library first, creeping through the hallway like a whisper. Margaret always loved this hour, when the house held its breath before the day began. She said it was the moment you could hear the walls thinking. The house had listened to a lot these past few years. Lies, greed, betrayal, silence. But now it was listening to something else. Me. Ellie hadn't called since her sentencing. Not once. Her payments started on time in April, like clockwork. Howard's office managed the restitution directly, so I never had to speak to her. She was a line item on a statement now. Nothing more, and Jacob, he called occasionally. Quiet, careful conversations. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We talked about small things. Weather, work, the maple tree. It was enough, for now. I walked through the kitchen barefoot. The floor was warm from the early sun. The brass key, the same one that started this entire story, hung from a small nail by the back door. I hadn't needed to use it in months, but I left it there like a quiet reminder that silence can be a blade sharper than rage. The library smelled like lemon oil and oak again. The carpenter had done a perfect job. Not a mark of the gaming chair remained. On the wall above the shelves hung the blueprint Margaret drew her first pencil line on. It wasn't framed for decoration. It was framed because it belonged here, just like I did. Martha came over that morning with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of biscuits. She didn't knock. She never had to. The porch was freshly painted, white against the green of the lawn, and the steps didn't creak anymore. "Morning," she said, stepping inside. Her eyes scanned the kitchen like someone revisiting a favorite book. "Morning. You ever think about selling?" she asked. Not because she thought I would, but because she liked poking at quiet places. I smiled. Not a chance. She nodded. "Good." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table that once held forged documents, laughter that wasn't real, betrayal that wore family faces. Now it held 2 mugs and a plate of biscuits. "You know," she said, "people in town still talk about it. How it all happened." "Let them," I said. "Stories don't net hurt when they set are true." She looked at me for a long second. "You didn't burn them." "No," I said softly. "They did that themselves." Ruth dropped by later with a single flash drive, the entire evidence archive condensed into neat digital files. "This is the last copy," she said. "Yours to keep or delete." I held the flash drive between my fingers. It weighed nothing, but for 3 years the story inside it weighed everything. "What would you do?" I asked. She tilted her head. "I said keep it, not because you need it, because you earned it." She left it on the counter and walked out into the sunlight. I didn't decide right then, I just let it sit. That evening, I sat on the porch with the blueprint in my lap. Fireflies blinked in the yard like scattered embers. The maple tree rustled in a warm breeze. Across the street, Martha's house lights glowed soft. The air smelled like freshly cut grass. Jacob pulled up just after 9. His car idled at the curb. He didn't bring flowers or apologies. Just a folded piece of paper in his hand. He walked up the steps slowly, like a man approaching something fragile. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He handed me the paper. It was a copy of his signed restitution statement, notarized and stamped. "Last installment settlers already paid," he said. I worked extra shifts. I looked at the paper, then at him. The same boy who once traced his finger along library shelves, who once laughed in this house before he learned to follow his aunt into shadows. You didn't have to bring this, I said. I know, he replied. I just needed to hand it to you, not the court. We sat on the porch in silence for a long time. The night wrapped around us, slow and heavy but not suffocating anymore. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like a stranger in his presence. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer it. What sat between us wasn't a wound anymore. It was just time. I'm sorry, Jacob whispered eventually. I didn't say I forgave him, but I didn't look away either. That was enough for both of us. After he left, I walked back inside and held the flash drive one last time. The evidence. The recordings. The receipts. The notarized trail of a family tearing itself apart and revealing what was left beneath the noise. I opened the wood stove door in the corner of the library. Margaret and I installed it during the winter of 1998, the year the furnace failed. It still worked like it always had. I set the flash drive on a small scrap of kindling. The plastic cracked softly as the flame kissed it. No drama, just heat and release. The past didn't disappear. It just stopped being the only thing in the room. The house smelled like burning oak and warm air. I leaned against the wall and let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding for 3 years. That night, I wrote my last line in the ledger. I didn't burn my family down. I just stopped holding up their roof. The brass key stayed on its nail. The porch light stayed on. The house breathed around me like it always had, patient, steady, mine. People think revenge stories end with fireworks or a gavel. But the real ending happens in a kitchen at sunrise, or on a porch at night when silence finally belongs to you again. The walls don't lie. The house doesn't take sides. It just listens. I sat down in the library chair, the same one Margaret picked out when we first built this place, and ran my hand along the blueprint frame one last time. This house had heard everything. The whispers, the laughter, the lies, the courtroom echoes. And now it heard nothing but the steady beat of a man who outlasted all of it. I whispered into the empty room, "We said you're done." And for the first time in years it whispered back in its own way, through creaks and sighs and warm air rising through the floorboards. Justice didn't just roar. It settled,